Hey, what is going on, everyone? It's me, Mr. Morrow, and welcome back to another episode of ModChat. For those who do not know, this here is a podcast I do here at least once a month in two different forms. First of all, it is available in a video visual form here on the Mr. Mario 2011 YouTube, Rumble, and Odyssey channels. Additionally, it is available like an actual podcast, so if you want to take it around and listen to it wherever the hell you want to in audio-only form, simply look up ModChat, all one word, on your favorite podcasting app, host, provider, or platform, and you should hopefully be able to find it. I know it's not available on all of them, but it is available on most of them. Either way, this is a series and podcast where I come on here, I share a little bit of what I find to be new, interesting, cool, maybe sometimes a little bit of show and tell in the world of video game modding and video game console modding. Now, this month, there's only going to be a few topics we're going to be hitting here, so it might be a little bit of a shorter episode, but they were still some pretty cool ones nonetheless. And usually I do appear on video a little bit on this time around I'm not doing that, but I figured I'd show you all at least a little bit of limbo footage that I have from a bit ago, and I thought it also would be a little fitting for one of the topics that we're going to get into here. So without further ado, let's go ahead and just hop into those topics. Now, the first one here is going to be related to the Xbox One and Xbox Series consoles. A few months ago, I did some footage over a upcoming exploit, which was collateral damage for the Xbox One and Xbox Series consoles. On top of that, I've also shown some proof of concepts on it and also how to get it set up. Now, one of the things that you can do is you can dump games and applications if you have everything set up accordingly on that. And while as the goal has not been to make those games playable on the Xbox One, like if you dump a game, decrypt it, and then play it on there, really that hasn't been done yet, we have ended up getting something from that over on the PC, which here is upcoming, and this here is XWine1. They stay here on Twitter introducing XWine1, an Xbox One translation layer for Windows PCs. Currently, 6 games are fully playable, with others reaching logos and in-game. More news to come. And they've shared a few photos here. Now, this is at the beginning of the month, September 8th of this year. If we look here, as you can see, this is Minecraft Xbox One Edition, which is playing on PC here. This here is Peggle 2, and you could see evidence that they are running this on Windows 11. Here is Limbo, which, there you go, now you're picking up the reference on that. And we have Sonic Mania right here. They also have a couple other examples, one of them being Undertale, and another one here being Chaos Child 404 Not Found. Finally, there's also a couple of videos here, so let's go ahead and check out one of them. This one here just seems to be all the proof, so as you can see, this is Windows 11. They're firing this shortcut up. It opened up that command prompt in the background, which actually, let me pause that a bit here. All right, here we go. It was launching it from C, Xbox, the Minecraft build itself, mount minecraft.client.executable. And as you can see right here, yes, you can play Minecraft on PC, but this one here is the Xbox One edition, which is being played on PC. Now, for anybody watching this who might be wondering, okay, what is the point of this here? You can just easily download Minecraft on PC and play it there. Well, this here is, again, being able to take the Xbox One and Xbox Series builds of games, at least Xbox One at this point specifically, and being able to play them on PC. For anybody who's asking if this is an emulator, this is similar to an emulator, but it is technically not. Essentially, if I can kind of boil it down in kind of layman's terms here, when you are running games through an emulator, you are using software and even at sometimes hardware to emulate and I guess therefore replicate the actual hardware. So for example, if you're just running, let's say, DuckStation on PC, you're going to be using software to try and replicate the PlayStation 1 hardware to play PlayStation games on PC. If you're using something such as a Mister, that would be what some people, including myself, call hardware emulation, where really the PlayStation core in this instance is being rebuilt to run on newer hardware, such as an FPGA. This here is neither of those two. This here is a translation layer. So for example, if you end up dumping a game such as this, there might be executables on that, but those executables are not going to run natively on Windows because they are designed for an Xbox One environment, an Xbox One console, and they're making Xbox One related calls. This here, the translation layer, really just allows you to really translate that. So it's not being emulated, but it ends up taking all those calls, functions, and such that would be required to run a Xbox One game. This would allow it here to run on a PC. So for example, you have Peggle 2 right here, and when you boot it up, when it is expecting to do anything related to the Xbox, it's going through XWINE1, which XWINE1 is going to be the translation layer between the two of them. So whenever Peggle 2, for example, here is making any types of calls to do anything related to the Xbox One that it is expected to run on, XWINE1 is going to be there to translate those to Windows-specific calls. And from there, as you can see, it's able to run Xbox One software on a PC. So that is really cool to see. We've seen this several years ago, and I cannot remember the name of it. And there was one translation layer, I want to say it was called Spine. I believe that's what it was. But let's say it was Spine, for example, which was released for Linux, and it was the same thing but for the PlayStation 4. So you would do the same thing, you have your Linux setup there, you have to provide decrypted games, you also have to have a decrypted PS4 file system, which you can get from a jailbroken system, and then once you combine that with the translation layer, you'd be able to play games for the PS4 on Linux. Again, not emulation, but a translation layer. This one here looks really good so far. I will say though, I wasn't expecting this much progress so soon, and even so at this point, like, this looks great. We haven't seen a release of this just yet as I'm recording this, but this looks incredibly great so far. So we can go ahead and close out of this here. However, they do have, of course, a Twitter page here, which you can see Xbox One translation layer for Windows PCs, not associated with the Wine project. So that's when they announced it, but you can see that they've been making additional progress on here. One of them has been, now this might be something where, as you can see, it's not going to be like the most polished here, but I'm sure we're going to see updates on this. But if some people are wondering what is the big deal on something like this, well, you have examples like this, like for example, Forza Horizon 2. Forza Horizon 2 was never playable on PC. It never ended up getting ported over to PC, and it only came out on Xbox 360 and Xbox One. Now, I haven't played the Xbox 360 version of it, but there are a lot of sacrifices that were made to make it run on the Xbox 360, to the point where people have told me that it feels like an entirely different game. So if you want the true Forza Horizon 2 experience, you could only play it on Xbox One or, I suppose, Xbox Series. But now you have examples such as this where you can actually boot up Forza Horizon 2 to the title screen. Forza Horizon 3, as you can see, ends up reaching the menus right here, so that's really nice to see. And I bring that up here because not only those are some of the few tweets they shared, but for anybody wondering, okay, hey, I can play any of these games here on PC, what is the point of that? Well, the point will be that there's going to be some games that have been locked to console only that will now be playable on PC, hopefully in the near future, so that's always wonderful to see here. And now there's no release date for this, there's no download available or anything, but based on what we're seeing so far, this is definitely impressive, and I will be keeping my eye on this. Next up is going to be some PlayStation 5 related news here, and this is from wololo.net, where there's going to be a few articles that I'm referencing here, and this is in regards to the PS5 UTMX Jailbreak, a new jailbreak here, which has been released by Spectre Dev. Now, this one was pretty early on, and this one ended up targeting, from the initial release, 1.x and 2.x related firmwares. It is WebKit based, and it does have support for other firmwares. I will be covering that later on. However, this is nice because this is another jailbreak which is available for the PlayStation 5. On top of that, it is also WebKit, so it does not rely on something such as BDJB, which is a great implementation, but keep in mind that not everybody will be able to use that. Not only people might not be able to burn their own Blu-ray discs, but that would completely omit anybody who has a digital-only console. So looking into this here, he states PlayStation hacker Spectre Dev has released an implementation of the recently disclosed UTMX exploit for PS5. This is a jailbreak using that particular exploit and relying on the PS-free WebKit exploit as an entry point. Spectre Dev stated that this particular implementation can ultimately be ported up to 5.x firmwares included. Firmware 6 patched the WebKit vulnerability here, so a different entry point will need to be used in order to activate the UTMX exploit on firmwares 6.0 and above, up to 7.61. Again, this is for the PS5, not the PS4, for anybody who might be confused by those lower numbers on here. Now, the TLDR he's giving us is that people on firmwares 1.x and 2.x can already give a try to this newly released jailbreak. on firmwares 3.x to 5.x, more work is required for this particular implementation of the jailbreak, but this might come with time. Firmware 6 to 7.61 cannot use this particular implementation, since it relies on a WebKit exploit which was patched in 6.0. There is, however, significant hope that other entry points can be leveraged, such as BDJB or a game exploit, to then trigger the UTMX exploit jailbreak. Firmware 8.0 patches the UTMX exploit, so a PS5 on 8.0 or above will not be able to run the jailbreak. So for our firmwares, I'm actually going to reference the PS5 dev wiki, and for anybody who might be wondering on that, so we can look here, and we're talking about these numbers now. These are essentially like the firmware strings that we used to see for like development firmwares and such on like development kits, test kits. But the funny thing is they end up just putting that onto the retail side. So you kind of have to go with the short version. So when somebody is saying 1.00, they're talking about 20.01-1.00. So you kind of just ignore the front-facing characters right here, and these are the ones you're looking for after the hyphen or the dash. So 1.0, 1.01. Now, if we're looking for this, for example, it's saying that this can work up to 7.61 firmware right here. Now, it has been patched in firmware 8.00. So this is to say here, I'm referencing this because if you have a PlayStation 5, which you use online, if you have taken it online or updated it really any point past September 13th, 2023, unfortunately, you are going to be out of luck using this here. And this is almost a year. It's been a little over a year. So let's say you have a PS5 sitting around, or you have it sitting in a box and it has not been taken online for over a year, then you're probably going to be on firmware 7.61 or lower, and you would be able to at least make use of the UTMX jailbreak, whether it will be through WebKit or through BDJB as your entry point. Now, what we had seen before was we had jailbreaks working up to 4.51. So that one ended up releasing on March 8th, 2022, and then it was succeeded on March 23rd, 2022. So unfortunately, to have a jailbroken PS5 for a bit, you would have had to have a system that was updated no later than March 23, 2022 online. However, with this upcoming news I'm going to be covering here, Spectre has ended up updating this jailbreak, so it now works up to firmware 5.50. So this is to say here that it works up to 5.50, this current one, and it was patched in 6.00. And since 6.0 came out September 7th, 2022, for the most part, if you have a system that hasn't been taken online since, very early September 2022, then your system is vulnerable for this jailbreak here. And that's what we're talking about here with this next update, where it says Spectre Dev releases UTMX jailbreak for firmware 5.50 and below. Payloads still need to work on 5.x. And Wololo states here, following the release for firmwares 1.x and 2.x just a couple of days ago, code has been added to the UTMX jailbreak for PS5, and it now supports firmwares up to 5.50 included. This is pretty big news, considering that until today, only firmware 4.51 and below were actually hackable. However, there are limitations with this jailbreak for firmwares 5.0 and above, read below. Now they state here, Spectre Dev has just released an update to his implementation of the UTMX exploit chain, porting it to firmwares 3.x up to 5.50 included. This means the exploit chain is now working on all firmwares up to 5.50. Specifically, here is what version 1.2 of the exploit brings. It has support for firmwares 1.0, 1.2, 2.7, 3.0, 3.20, 4.0, 4.02, 4.03, 4.50, interesting, not 4.51, but 5.0, 5.02, 5.1, and 5.50. And additionally, it also has added code to make porting easier. So they state if you're running a PS5 on firmware 5.50 or below, you can try this exploit right away using the download links below. Read on for the limitations though, as they are quite impactful for now, and this is what we're going to be looking into. They state that we've had a jailbreak on PS5 for firmware 4.51 and below for quite some time now, which means these firmwares and how to bypass security mitigations on them is quite well understood. 5.0 and above, however, were uncharted territory until now. It seems Sony has patched some vulnerabilities that were used until now to take control of the PS5 system and execute unsigned code. DLSim in particular has been used to load additional libraries and functions after privilege escalation. It appears using that code the way the scene has until now isn't working anymore, at least out of the box. Specifically, rules appear to have been enforced so that a hijacked process such as WebKit can't load libraries it isn't supposed to. The existing SDK had ways to bypass these restrictions, which appeared to not work anymore. So the big thing it's talking about is something such as libhijacker, which allowed you to do things like that. In short, you would jailbreak your system, you would run the exploit, which would then load in libhijacker, and then libhijacker would allow you to be in a modified state outside of the Blu-ray player or outside of the WebKit, which at that point allowed you to, well, jailbreak the PS5. Going back here though, according to Spectre Dev, this means that changes will be needed in the PS5 Scene SDK and the various payloads that have been used so far, as they do not work as is on firmware's 5.x. Hackers are already thinking of potential solutions using existing features of the Homebrew SDK, and it looks like it might just be a bump in the road rather than a complete showstopper, but only time will tell. Now, if you'd like to download the actual jailbreak or even look at the code here, it is available on the PS5 UTMX Jailbreak repository, and they even state here, this is from Spectre Dev as well as Echo Stretch, the summary here stating this repo contains a WebKit ROP exploit of the UTMX race use after free vulnerability reported by Synactive. It's basically a port of fail overflows and flats exploit strategy. It abuses the UAF to get a read-write mapping into the kernel thread stack and leverages pipe reads and writes to establish a not quite ideal arbitrary read-write primitive in the kernel. This read-write is then escalated to a better one that leverages an IPv6 socket pair and pipe pair for stable read-write that can be passed to payloads in the same way that was possible with the IPv6 PS5 kernel exploit. The page itself is a stripped down and modified version of IdleSauce's PS5 exploit host, and it already did the work of gluing PS-Free to my previously used code style. This host is also my personal choice for running things as it's very smooth and integrates useful payloads. Hopefully it is updated to support this exploit in the near future. Ultimately, a payload loader will be launched to listen for payload elfs on port 9021. I recommend the PS5 Payload Dev SDK as it should have full compatibility with this loader when kernel offsets are added. This vulnerability impacts 1.0 to 7.61 firmwares. However, firmwares greater than or equal to 3.0 seem to have additional mitigations that require tweaking of the exploit to work. Furthermore, the WebKit vulnerability that we chain was patched in 6.0. So another WebKit exploit that achieves userland read-write will be required for these systems. Again, as I'm not focused on higher firmwares, this is left uncompleted for now. Some important notes: they say 3.0 and higher has lower reliability and may take longer to execute. If you're stuck at triggering race for a while, close the browser and retry. And then for 5.0 and later, the ELF loader currently doesn't work because we can no longer properly invoke DLSim. Payload SDK needs changes, which is what we talked about before. So essentially what this does, it states here in the currently included that it obtains arbitrary kernel read-write. It enables debug settings menu. It says that you'll have to fully exit settings to go back in and see it. It gets you root privileges and breaks out of the sandbox/jail, and it's able to run John Tornblum's ELF loader on port 9021 for payloads to execute. Because if you messed around with the PS4 or even the PS5, you know that it's not going to be like a custom firmware setup like the PS3, so to speak, where you like install a modified pup or you do something like PS3 hin. No, you essentially have to run this tethered exploit, and then once you have access, you're then able to push the payloads that you want on it. So for things such as hin or FTP support or anything else, really any of the fun stuff you want to do, it has to be a payload that is pushed to your system. But for the limitations, they state here, this exploit achieves read-write but not code execution. This is because we cannot currently dump kernel code for gadgets, as kernel.txt pages are marked as execute-only memory. Attempting to read kernel.txt pointers will panic. As per the above and the hypervisor enforcing kernel write protection, this exploit also cannot install any patches or hooks into the kernel space. Clang-based fine-grained control flow integrity is present and enforced. Supervisor mode access prevention and execution cannot be disabled due to the hypervisor. and they state that firmware, again, greater than or equal to 6.0 requires a new WebKit exploit and thus is not supported. So there we go, we have some more firmware support, and this is usable out of the box for the most part here, at least the jailbreak itself. It is usable, as we said, up to firmware, well, 5.50, and it can work up to 7.61. The difference is going to be this actual exploit here will not be able to utilize WebKit. You will have to go through another entry point such as an exploit game or using BDJB. Just keep those in mind. Well, that is about it for this episode here. As I said at the beginning, only a few topics we were going to be covering here, but some pretty cool ones nonetheless. We got to venture back into the land of PS5 jailbreaks with some new developments consistently and already getting new firmware supported with this new jailbreak, and even a Xbox One translation layer on PC, which, hey, I wasn't expecting that. That was pretty cool to see. Either way, that is about it for this episode here. Now, if you've made it to the end of this episode, typically I like to pick a keyword or a key phrase, and if you use this keyword or key phrase in a comment on the video upload, I'll know that you made it to the end of this episode. For this here, you know, even though this is not the game that I'm showing here, I have been playing and enjoying Astrobot in the background. So how about bot? Do you hate bot accounts? Do you develop bots? Do you play Astrobot? Are you a fan of it? Let me know what you think of Astrobot, or whatever bot solutions you might love or hate. As long as you use the word bot in a comment on the video upload, I'll know that you made it to the end of this episode. Either way, that is about it, as I said, for this episode of ModChat. If you enjoyed it and you were entertained, a like would absolutely be appreciated, and if you didn't like it, a dislike is fine as well too. But as I always say, this is Mr. Mario, signing off. Thank you for listening and watching, everyone, and until next time.